And that just built up pressure, which brought me to that point where I asked God to sort of back off. I grew up in a pastor's home with a lot of pressure to sort of be, someone who people could look up to. But it came to a point where I began to sort of feel the weight of walking out and living out my faith. And instead of taking that burden to Jesus and to the foot of the tree, to the cross, I began to sort of take it on myself. And that just built up pressure, which brought me to that point where I asked God to sort of back off. Little did I know that, backing off from God is probably one of the worst things ever. I just went through a real depression and just a real sadness because I had lost the joy that I had experienced in Christ when I asked God to sort of back off. And that led me to a point where I began to really struggle with anger. So I had a very short fuse, which I thought it was fine to begin with, because then I didn't have to take any nonsense from people. If people cross my path, I can just put them in place. But it began to actually take a hold of my life, and I began to actually lose control of myself. Or similarly with lust, when I was with groups, I was with people, I would never act upon the lust. But in the closed doors, in my bedroom, in the inner workings of my mind, I began to struggle with, and I didn't know what to do. And after trying and making many promises to God that I'm going to be a better person, I'm not going to be so angry, I'm not going to give in to lust, I began to find that actually I didn't have the strength to do anything about it. One of the most powerful stories in the Bible is the story about the prodigal son. And he decides to say, man, the people in my father's home were way better than I am. Look, I've just squandered everything away. And so he returns back home and he asks God for forgiveness. And that began to really break me on the inside. And that's when I began to experience God's love. Where he said, son, even though you don't meet the mark, I love you still. And I can wash away your sin. And I can make my strength perfect in your weaknesses. So those areas when you're weak, when you surrender to me, I can take over and I can begin to actually make something beautiful come out of it. And that's something that began to transform me inside out. It began to give me a hope that I didn't have within me. And in fact, it's that same hope that begins to motivate me even today. So whenever I encounter situations where my weaknesses are put on display, and there are plenty of that in the work that I do, the cross still gives me great hope, saying that even where I fail, even where I fall short, God is enough.